So my first statement was, I just want to make sure that in this breakout room, I can have opinion as a straight white male. And it like sucked the air out of the room. They didn't know how to handle that. They thought I was going to be like, oh yeah, of course, you're all right. And when I said that, it was like, I said, I think this video is hateful. I think it's teaching hate to, you know, this demographic that this woman doesn't like that we watch this video about. And I don't think that's right.
Welcome to the Reality Therapy Podcast, where the truth will set you free.
Welcome to the Reality Therapy Podcast. I'm Ryan Rogers. Joining me today is licensed professional counselor associate R.C. Lehman. Welcome. Glad to have you.
I'm glad to be here, man. I really appreciate it.
So start off telling us who you are, where you come from.
Oh man, so my name's R.C. Lehman. I'm a licensed professional counseling associate in the state of Texas. Um, and I come from a big variety of background. I never intended to be a therapist. I won't say stumbled into it, but a series of life events took place. And then I was like, you know what? I'm going to go be who I need because I couldn't find the person I needed to be for me. Does that make sense? Kind of roundabout. So 13 semesters later, I got my LPC associate, so I'm doing things kind of who I wished I could have seen when I needed somebody.
Most kids don't grow up dreaming about becoming a therapist.
Yeah, yeah. No joke. Yeah, that ain't no kidding.
So what is it that you were looking for that you didn't find?
Well, it kind of has some backstory to that. So I've been in public service, law enforcement and EMS, and a volunteer firefighter, although I did complete most of my book work to be a licensed state firefighter. I never finished the boot camp part of it because other things were taking place. And then my son had a tragic accident, ended up in the hospital for 7 months, multiple surgeries. And so my life kind of came apart because of the accident. I ended up with some criminal charges. So I went from being a cop to having criminal charges and then didn't know what to do with myself. I almost lost everything. And I went to a couple of therapists, I think three in total. And everybody kind of just nodded their head and was like, that sounds bad. And I'm like, yeah, it is. Now what? And so they couldn't give me those answers, I guess. And I needed somebody to look at me in the face and go, dude, you can't do anything about what's going on right now. You need to go to the gym and you need to drink some water and you need to make a schedule or, write a list and come back next week and tell me how that goes. And then we'll work on some more. And I was in the state where I'd have said, okay, yeah, let's do that. I'd have been in the gym every day, and those didn't happen. They suggested some things, like EMDR. That was the first thing. Oh, this is trauma. Let's go through EMDR. And I was like, well, let's just talk for a little bit, like what can I do when I'm not here? And so I was like, well, I'm going to go once it kind of settled down, I needed something to focus on because life was so upside down. And, that became school and called a friend. She helped me get into grad school and I worked my way through it. And that wasn't easy, but got through it. And now that's kind of how I do things. When somebody comes to me with something going on, I'm like, all right, let's make a plan. What can we do? So I use a lot of solution focused CBT type therapy.
I love both of those. Yeah, I mean, the 1 hour a week you're in therapy is such a small part of your life that even an amazing, incredible therapist is going to be somewhat limited in how effective they can be if the rest of your week is not being shaped. I think, a huge part of what turned me around is not the hour a week in therapy or SSRI or anything like that. It's like you said, getting to the gym, eating relatively healthy food, paying attention to my sleep schedule. Those things have helped my mental health, kind of a lot more than kind of what you're told in the profession.
Yeah. And why therapists are not addressing that. I've very rarely seen therapists ask about those things. I make sure to ask four questions. How are you mentally, physically, emotionally, and spiritually? At the beginning or at the end of every session, my clients hear one of those. And, some of them are tired of me talking about water. I think water's a good thing for the body. Drink your water, Um, it helps move those chemicals around. There you go. Yeah. It helps move the chemicals in your body. If your bloodstream looks like pudding, you don't understand why you're depressed. Well, the chemicals that need to move around aren't moving. And, you need to help it out, get it hydrated. So I'm sure to ask about those things for all my clients as much as I need to, as much as I can. So
That's such a huge piece, that what's going into your body, how you're moving your body, how you're resting your body, those pieces. Why do you think our profession focuses so little on that?
You know, I don't know. And then they use these buzzwords like holistic. Well, what does holistic mean when you're just wanting to talk about my trauma from my childhood? Like, I know I'm 40 years old. My childhood was 30 years ago. How is that more important than what I ate for dinner? That's kind of my thought on it. Um, so I don't understand why people aren't focusing on. I know I'm not a dietitian. I tell people that I'm not. I'm not here to change your meds. I don't have that kind of license. But what are you doing for yourself? If you're all you're eating is snow cones and cotton candy, we probably need to talk about diet. Why are you doing that? Does it feel good? What are you doing for water? Are you drinking enough? A lot of people think they're drinking enough and it's not, you know. Uh, so I don't overstep my bounds, I guess, but I do ask about what are you doing for your body? What are you doing for your soul? I'm a Christian counselor, so I put it in my informed consent that I use biblical practices. I got a whole book full of shelf full of Bibles back there. That whole shelf has got Bibles on it. And so I make sure to integrate that kind of stuff too. Are you praying? Are you reading? So I try to hit the holistic, really the whole what I think is holistic.
I love that. I work at a men's addiction rehab facility, and I do once a week Christian therapy, and I really love that because I feel like it gives you so much direction for where you're going that you might not get from just standard like person centered therapy.
Yeah, I think that it's important because whether you have a belief in God or you don't, spirituality is a piece of a human. If you walk into a room and you're mad, you can change the feeling of the room, right? I think the kids are calling it vibes. I don't know. I'm not up to date on terminology, right? But you can change that. That's your spirituality. Those things affect how your day to day goes. And if you think that won't affect your mentality or your emotions or, you know, get real mad and then try to do some schoolwork and see how well that does for you. But do a little prayer, a little meditation. Those sort of things are so important, especially if you're a Christian, you know. And I'm one of those.
Hmm. So what was your bachelor's in?
My bachelor's degree in 2007 was in computer information systems.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So,
Interesting. And you just recently went back and got your master's. So, what can you tell me about the difference between the education or just the feel on campus between those two events?
well, so when I went to a local college here in Central Texas called Tarleton State University. They're
Yeah.
part of the Texas A&M system.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know Tarleton?
Yeah,
That's a
I went to Baylor. Yeah.
Oh yeah,
Just
yeah,
just
okay,
down the
right.
road. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, so in 2003, 4, 5, 6, it was the cowboy school. That's what we
Yeah.
were. Plowboys were a big thing. We did cowboy stuff. A lot of, the whole school ended up showing up at the arena, watching the rodeos. When I went back in 2019, with a 12-year gap, it had changed to more of the, social justice, and I might have been departmental,
You
because
went to Tarleton for master's as well?
uh-huh, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I went right back. And now I've got it changed from even that because I'm pursuing my MBA at Howard Payne, which is a local school here where I live.
Mm.
And so it's different. It's a Baptist college, so it's a totally different feel, a totally different type of thing. But
And business is very different from counseling as well. They're a lot more pragmatic, I feel like.
yeah, yeah, a lot less about how you feel and more about what you do, you know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
So I've got a range of different educational experiences, but it really changed we were a bunch of cowboys and country boys in 2007, and I go back and it's not. It's the social justice, the liberal side of things has taken over in those areas that I didn't experience the first time. It was more prevalent the second time.
Walk me through your personal psychology of kind of walking into that classroom? Because I had a number of jarring experiences walking back to grad school, just sitting in class, like, what is going on here? Like, did you have like a unsettling moment of like, what am I looking at?
Yes, I did. You know, Well, a couple of things happened. One, I applied for grad school in 2019, and so then COVID hits. So COVID's starting to ramp up, and they tell us, well, we're going to do a couple of semesters online. Those couple of semesters lasted 10 semesters. So we didn't even see a classroom till the end of the thing. So we're all online, we're all on Zoom and doing hybrid type courses. But I was kind of outed as, I don't know why, but I feel like it was the straight white male coming to work with, law enforcement, military, EMS, which is predominantly straight white men where I'm from, and it was kind of like, well, that makes you the enemy, is how I felt. And I had times where people were turning to me and like, if you wouldn't have done this, and I'm like, what are you talking? I didn't vote. What are you talking about? Like, I'm not in Congress. I'm not like, what are you talking about? And then I ended up some weird situations where like at the time I got enough hours to work as a crisis response team member and a what we call a QMHP, qualified mental health professional with a local um, organization, one of the state run organization, LMHA. And so I was doing crisis response and I go to a crisis class and everybody introduces themselves. And I was like, well, I work crisis. That's what I do right now. And the teacher was like, oh, yeah, I've worked in a school. I have a PhD, but I've only worked in middle school. And she really didn't know how to respond. And things like saying suicide. Well, I had a history in EMS, fire, police. The word suicide is not a big deal. It rolls off the tongue. Are you thinking about suicide? Yes or no? Oh, okay. You're not thinking about suicide. Are you thinking about hurting yourself? Are you thinking about killing yourself, somebody else? And those sort of things were very uncomfortable for a lot of people that I had a lot of experience in. So at one hand, I was looked at like the enemy. On the other hand, I was looked at like, wow, this guy's got some knowledge. So it was kind of day to day. It was really weird. So,
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, the suicide question is a standard part of our intake, our
oh,
biopsychosocial
yeah.
intake that we do. I had professors that had almost zero clinical experience. They had basically done their internship and then became a professor, and they had no like relevant experience in any of this stuff. I had a professor who was just like, I mean, it was almost like that stereotypical Gen Z type language where he refused to say the word suicide. He would say he unalived himself. And I was like, "What? What is
Right.
this classroom? Are we adults here?"
Right. Yeah. 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 And
Hmm.
they don't, when they have somebody like that, they don't understand. I've worked so many crisis calls that I know, as whatever in my careers, it doesn't cause them to want to be suicidal to ask them if they're suicidal. We know that. There's been research on that. So you should ask that question. And they were like, well, then what? You ask 10 more questions. Do you feel like hurting yourself? Do you feel like cutting yourself? Do you feel like burning yourself? You just ask those questions and people with no clinical experience didn't know how to, they get real tense and you'd see them like, oh my gosh, I can't believe you just said that. Well, if you're not going to say it as the therapist or the crisis person, who's going to say it? Like, who's going to ask that question? So
I mean, it feels like therapy should be the place where, or like a crisis response thing where you say the things that it's like, okay, this is kind of somewhat of an emergency situation. If you're coming to me, we should be able to talk about the things that you can't talk about other places. And there's this air of we have to be super sensitive and kind of constantly monitor and police our speech. And it seems to have sanitized therapy to the point where it makes it like ineffective.
I think you're 100% correct. And I ask the hard questions. I tell them up front, my informed consent. I'm going to make you uncomfortable. You're here because things aren't going the way you want them to. I want them to go the way you want them to, but that means we got to be uncomfortable. So I'm going to ask questions that are probably uncomfortable. And I've never had somebody leave therapy because they were uncomfortable. I've had them leave because they felt better. They, you know, didn't think they needed me anymore. They kept me in mind. They'll see me again in a month or a year. But I've never had somebody go, well, I just can't handle this. I've always had them ready and willing to answer the question, so I think you're right, though. I think a lot of people have sanitized their language so far that they're not getting to the hard parts. And I think that's why we're not seeing a lot of growth in some therapy aspects, in my
Mm,
opinion. I don't think somebody should go to therapy for 30 years and not get any better.
mm, yeah. Mm. Um, what was the response to you on campus as a white man getting your master's?
You know, some people, they're like come on, like, you know, I guess in my department, I was one of the only men there. I was one of the only men that finished the whole program, and graduated. I graduated with like 22 or 23 um, females that started the program about the same time I did. And no other men graduated at the same time out of our program with me. There were times where people were taking more classes than I was, and they would show up in a class. Um, and, I made some good friends that were some of the men that were going through it, wanting to kind of do the same thing, wanting to be a good masculine light in the world kind of deal and help people. Um, so I really didn't, I don't know. I guess I'm a little jaded too with the kind of the life I've lived that I'm kind of like, I don't care. Yeah. So,
Mm.
if the people look down on me, that's fine. Um, I ended up in one situation with somebody who ended up being a friend. But we were in class and we were talking about the baby boomer type generation, the generation of, just put your head down, no matter what happens, put your head down, go back to work. And everybody was kind of dogging on them. We had a pretty diverse class of millennials and all the way up into somebody in their 50s. And everybody's just dogging on this whole generation. I said, whoa, hold on. You have to think this generation gave us everything, every cell phone. They put a man on the moon. They gave you your car, every type of technology, every computer, everything that you have around you was built by that generation. So you could shake your butt on TikTok. And, that's the truth. And this one lady turns around and says, well, but, I walked into a mattress store one time and the guy wouldn't sell me a mattress without my husband. I said, how's that? Okay. So we have a very differencing of opinion of just the words. Like I was just saying, the generation was built to help us with everything. They were a great generation. You turn that to like somehow you were persecuted because of that generation. That's not what I'm saying. I didn't say they were perfect. I just said they gave us most everything we have, like computers and everything that you touch is probably built by that generation. And
There's this odd standard where if it's like we don't like you, if it's baby boomers or whoever it is, your standard is perfection. And anything you do wrong is like proof of how terrible you are. But any other group that we like, there's you know basically no standards. Like they would never apply some of these standards to like Islam, for instance.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And they keep that very undercover of what the standard is,
Yeah,
and
it's constantly shifting.
yeah, I mean, I'm one of those kind of guys. Like, first, err on the side of caution, and then apply the same standard to everybody. Like, I don't care who you are, I'm gonna give you the same. So,
Yeah. Man, to me in my program, it felt like being a man or even being a white man, it didn't mean that you're automatically bad, but to me it meant you're automatically suspect. Like there's fewer chances for you. Like we're kind of waiting for you to slip up and say the wrong thing.
when so one of our first classes, I actually put some. It had been a long time since I've been in school, so I put some Bible verses and referenced it correctly and all that. But that's a huge no-no at a state school. You don't put Bible
Mm,
verses in no
yeah.
papers. And so I got called in, and we needed to discuss my writing style. And the professor that did this was a PhD who was about to retire. Um, and he was just I don't know, horrible human being, it seemed like. Um, he did some really gross things on our Zoom calls even. He was just like, it was time for him to go. So we made an arrangement with another professor who ended up being kind of a mentor. He met with me about 2 or 3 times just to work on writing because I'm not a good writer. And then that was my first like call down on who I am and what about me. Then the second one, I ended up in the dean's office with a meeting because we were in cultural diversity, and the instructor pulls up a video of a woman who is basically saying that white men are the devil. They've destroyed the whole world and they hate, every white man, period. And so then we went into breakout rooms. I don't know if you've used Zoom
Oh yeah.
breakout rooms,
Yeah.
and so they put us in breakout rooms, and I'm in there with a couple other individuals, and I didn't say anything. I wasn't going to even respond. I wasn't going to say a word. I was just going to let them talk, bide my time till the breakout room was over, go back into class, listen to whatever, and move on. And one of them decided that he would call me out and say, like, well, what do you think? And I was like, okay. And so my first statement was, I just want to make sure that in this breakout room, I can have opinion as a straight white male. And it like sucked the air out of the room. They didn't know how to handle that. They thought I was going to be like, oh, yeah, of course, you're all right. And, and when I said that, it was like, I said, I think this video is hateful. I think it's teaching hate to, you know, this demographic that this woman doesn't like that we watch this video about. And I don't think that's right. And it really offended the other people in this breakout room. They made a complaint with the dean. The dean wanted to see me after, with the head of the department. The dean, the professor, and I think somebody else was there, and they wanted me to tell what I learned about the video. And I was like, nothing. I learned this woman's hateful, and the fact that she's doing a TED talk with this much hate in her heart is kind of wild. I can't believe that this would be something you always show. And they kind of let it go because what else could they say? But it definitely put a big rift between me and them. Like it's like, oh, okay, so this is how things are gonna be. Like I'm on a separate side of this whole thing than most people. And I didn't realize that until that moment.
I wrote a paper in this is my first semester of grad school in my multicultural class about how America is kind of like the prompt was essentially encouraging you or nudging you to say like how oppressive America is. And my take on it was America's a good place that lifts up people from all different kind of backgrounds and it's better than other systems, because it gives opportunity to a diverse range of groups and everything. I got called into my professor's office and scolded for my lack of empathy for the marginalized.
Yeah,
Like
yeah, yeah,
there's only one right answer. Like it doesn't even matter what evidence you present. Like you're just wrong.
yeah, yeah. I was given failing grades on things. I was given, I was reduced grades on things because of the opinion in the paper, not structure, not, of course all we did was write papers. We had very few tests or anything. There was always major paper project stuff. But yeah, that was the same thing. Like because you're a Christian and you put that in here, that's a problem. And of course we just witnessed that at Oklahoma uh OU, right? Where that girl got a 0 and,
Mm.
there was all the protests and all that kinda stuff. It was wild with him, so, that kinda seems like, okay, there's a barrier. Now, I'm not trying to put the barrier. I want to talk to people. I wanna, come talk to me. I'll talk to anybody. I'll respect your opinion, even if I disagree with it 100%. It's your opinion. I'm not gonna live like that. I'm not gonna accept it, as gospel. I'm gonna understand it's your opinion, and that's okay. We still be friends.
It feels like this happened almost overnight that you had, I went to college for the first time in '05, and it felt like politics was just like not a big side is
Ah,
not a relevant issue one way or the other. It was are we going out, getting a keg tonight? Or
yeah,
is who do you have a crush
yeah,
on? Like, are we playing a game of pickup basketball? That's the kind of thing people talked about. And then all of a sudden, I came back to finish my bachelor's in 2020, and it just seems so hyper focused on politics. And I mean, just every little thing you can just pick apart. Is this problematic? Can we find some racism or some sexism, in here? Can we just dig out or just invent it? And I don't know. When did you start noticing this?
I'll tell you, when I went back for my master's degree, I was in a really bad headspace. So I was just kind of like head down, don't mess with me, don't talk to me. People thought I was evil or something. I don't know. I just wanted to get through it because I was looking for something to focus on, which is funny because now I use that as therapy techniques. I'm like, hey, if you're having, stress in all other areas, find you something to focus on. I tell a lot of my guys, build a model airplanes. Once the stress goes away, you lose interest in models, throw the whole thing away. It doesn't matter. You're out $20, but
Yeah.
this gives you that focus. That's what I was doing inadvertently. I didn't even know it. And so for the first few semesters, I'm just head down, forget about it. And then it starts to be more apparent. My life starts to stabilize. My job starts to get back into routine. And then it's like, oh, this has been here. Y'all hate me. Just because I walked in the door, you hate me. I don't know why. Like, why? What did I do to you guys? Like, you dislike me so badly. And then I was like, oh man. So I don't know that feeling, like the night and day, you know, but then we started to see, oh, politics are like a big deal. And even some of the groups that I've on some Facebook therapy groups, that sort of stuff. And I'm like, wow, y'all are really about the politics. Like it's bad. So
Yeah. Did you notice any bias in grad school against conservatives, Republicans, Trump supporters?
nobody said it outright. You know what I mean? Like nobody was like, "Oh, you're MAGA," which I hate that term. Like I'm like it's his own thing now. Um, I am a conservative. I am a Christian. That's what I am. And whatever party or whatever person upholds my values, that's who I uphold. Like that's who I'm going to vote for. And I don't care what side of the aisle they're on, really. But it seemed like they kind of instantly looked at me like you were the enemy, and so I think I got off track there.
No,
Was
I mean,
my
I feel like over the years I've worked with communists, libertarians, Republicans, Democrats, people whose, politics are shaped by LSD and schizophrenia. I've worked with all kinds of people, and like never is that relevant to the type of care I give them. It's like, how can we help this person get better, suffer less, thrive more? And it seems so bizarre to me that that's like the forefront of their mind so much.
right. Yeah. Yeah, I've had some clients come in, well, I haven't had a client come in, I've had some support people, come in with clients, and I'm like, "Well, you probably need to read my informed consent." They get to the part that says Christian conservative, and they're like, "This bothers me." Okay, well, I'm not pushing my religion on you, I'm just trying to help you get your life. I'm not trying to push these things onto you. "Well, who'd you vote for?" I said, "No, I'm not going down that road, not at all." And, it's really upsetting to them. So
I've been kind of on a tangent lately of just things I'm reading and kind of YouTube videos I'm watching about this concept that kind of contemporary therapy has kind of morphed into its own religion. And I kind of think there's like this idea, well, it's like, of course, you as a Christian conservative shouldn't push your values in the therapy space, but there's a very real set of values and core beliefs that are just kind of assumed in contemporary therapy. It's okay to push those type of beliefs because they're considered kind of value neutral, but they're really not. Does that make sense?
oh, yeah. Yeah, like, the conservative values are considered evil, but the more liberal values are considered, "Okay, now we need to push these onto people." And so, I just don't agree with that. I don't agree. I don't push my values onto people, I just want them to get better. That's what I do this for, and I see these people that are in the worst times in crisis, like you said, I just want them to be better, their life to be better, whatever that is. Now, I could tell you that probably somebody who is an atheist, they're going to look at me and probably not choose me as their therapist. And that's okay. And, I'll help them find referrals. I'm not mad at anybody for their beliefs, but my beliefs don't make me evil. And I actually saw that as a comment in a Facebook group that basically they want to take licenses from conservative people, Christian people, that you shouldn't be a therapist. I'm
Is
like,
that therapist supporting therapists?
no, this was
Oh, the
LPC.
LP. I feel like every single I'm in a couple of those conservative therapist Facebook groups, but any like generic just therapist LPC whatever, like it doesn't say it in there, but it's ultra progressive. Like it doesn't have to say it; it's just assumed.
Yeah, yeah. It's really gone that way. And I always like err on the side of caution is what I said. Like, what is wrong with some biblical principles, even if you're not biblical, right? Be the husband of one wife. Don't lust after other people's things. Don't steal, kill, and murder. You know, these principles are not bad principles in general. Like, these are the things that no matter what side of the aisle, you should probably tell your people. Like,
Well, my grad program would disagree with you. In my marriage and family counseling class, I had to read a book called The Ethical Slut, which is why, polyamory is great. You should have open marriages and stuff like that. So that they
yeah,
they pretend to be value neutral, but they have a very definite set of values they're pushing.
right, right. And I don't see, and people may be upset at this, but I don't see those things working. They just don't work long term. They don't. I don't think you're going to find a 70 or 80-year-old couple been married for 55 years that were poly. I just don't think
Mm.
that's the thing. And I think that there's some good examples in actual religions who believe in it, and you find wives that are running away and children that are being assaulted and, all these kind of things that are going on because I don't believe that those things are true. So, and I'm also, man, if it says it in red in the good book, that's what I'm gonna take it to heart. Like, okay, you know, so
Yeah. Yeah, I like that. What about the gender identity trans thing? Was that a big issue in your program?
it wasn't, we did talk about those sort of things. It became more of an issue, after grad school. By the time we were in internship and practicum, that's when things started to really get higher ramped up. You're talking about 2022, 2023, 2024. But I actually was a therapist at a Baptist university for a little while. And that was one of the questions they asked me was um, if somebody came in who was struggling with their gender identity. And I said, man, according to my DSM, if you walk into the mirror and you're looking in the mirror and the person looking back at you is not somebody you recognize, like you're looking at a picture, like there used to be an old TV show called Quantum Leap. You remember that one?
No.
Uh, anyway, the guy I think they remade it actually, but it was a sci-fi show and he would jump into different bodies during history and he would live out a piece of their life and then
Oh.
jump out. So every time he looked in the mirror, he's seeing the reflection of the person he's in at the time. And I kind of referenced it to that. The guy I was interviewing with was a little older, so he understood the reference. But I said, if that's what you're doing, if that's you're looking in the mirror and the person looking back at you is not you, that's got to be a struggle. That's got to hurt. That's somebody needs help um, to see themselves. I said, but I don't know that that's what we're dealing with in total here. I think some of it is just fad, trend. I think it's fun to push buttons in those ways, kind of deal. I won't put a number to it, but there are people who look in the mirror and they don't feel like themselves. I'm sure that's why we have a diagnosis for it.
Hmm.
And they're looking at somebody else, a stranger, and who that stranger is, whether it's male, female, the opposite sex, a different sex. I understand that's got to be struggling. Um, but the rest of it kind of is like, are you really doing this, or is this a fad? Is this just a
Yeah.
trend for you?
I definitely think some of it's a fad, some of it's social contagion or trying to be transgressive or what have you. But it's so interesting to me that there's certain DSM diagnoses that we just clearly see as a delusion. So an 80-pound anorexic who looks in the mirror and says, I'm a morbidly obese person, we would all say that that's not true. We're not going to sign off on you getting liposuction.
Yeah.
That's not a thing. We're going to help you overcome this delusion. But for some reason, this trans thing is in a holy and sacred category where we just don't question it.
And see, I don't know how it got there. Who did that is the question. Like, is it politicians pushing the political agenda, and what are they getting get out of it? Or is it we call them psychological epidemics, where people go through these, societies go through a psychological epidemic where these things become okay, normal, or, for years when I was a kid, it was ADHD. Every kid I knew had ADHD. And it really was all, we're just kids, and some of them probably for sure did, you know, but a lot of them didn't. And so I'm not sure where it's coming from and what the end goal is. Like, what's the point of doing all that? If somebody's looking in the mirror and they don't see themselves and they're hurting because of it, I want to help them. But I want to help them identify the person in the mirror. I don't want to help them change until they get there by doing things like body mutilation type stuff, especially kids. I don't think that the kid thing should be outlawed. I think there's some Senate bills that are actually outlawing, you know, gender affirming surgeries for anybody under 18, I believe is what I've been reading. So
I think we've hit a tipping point. I really do. I think, and I think the science has been on our side for a while, but we're getting to the point where it's no longer like it's less socially acceptable to say you support transitioning kids.
yeah. Yeah. And see that's another thing. If it's right, it's right. It's right through
Yeah.
history. If it's right through history forever. If it's wrong, it's wrong. We don't find a time in the social culture that says, "Oh, well, it's right for now." No, that's not that's not true. We shouldn't be doing this to kids. If kids grow up and they want to make adult decisions when they're adults, then that's on them. Their life is on them, you know?
Yeah.
And so, but for kids, I think it's no good. But I think we're kind of glorifying some things like demasculation of men. Uh, you know, we don't want to be men to be men anymore. We want
Yeah.
men to be soft and gentle and easy and those sort of things. And I think that kind of plays into it. because then we push those narratives and there's no real strong masculine men standing up going, no, we're not doing this, period. You know,
Yeah.
so.
No, I love that. That gets into my next question is how do you see the concept of men and masculinity in contrast or at odds with the current therapy profession?
Man, you're getting deep now. I think that currently the narrative in a lot of programs that I've seen is that everybody should be um, sensitive, feeling, and all these kind of things. And I don't think that resonates with men. But yet we blame a lot of things on men. The patriarchy and all these problems we're having are because of men. Okay, but we got to have some people out there willing to help them as men, not willing to change them to be more sensitive or to be less care, whatever they're trying to. They're not toxic because they're men. Like that doesn't make them toxic, And so I disagree 100,000% with trying to make men not men so that they fit a narrative or fit society. Let them be men, kind of deal.
Mm, I agree with that. I think some of it comes down to, I think because the field is so heavily female dominated, even things that could be good for men are not explained very well. I think to women, let's sit down and talk about a problem seems like a natural solution. And I think a lot of men are like, why? Like, what's the point? What are we getting out of this? What's the end game? What's our goal? And I think if it's not presented in a way that makes it understand, it's easy for men to reject that because it doesn't kind of fit into our paradigm.
I actually had that come up one time. We were talking in one of our classes with somebody I had been in several classes with. And I said, listen, I can't explain to you what cops go through. A lot of mine, I'm a blue chip provider, which is free therapy for police officers in the state of Texas. So I get some officers, right? I won't say all of mine are officers, but there's a bunch. But I can't explain to you what they go through. I can't explain to somebody who's not in their shoes, really. I can tell you, but you won't be able to relate. And so this young lady looked at me and said, "Well, teach us how." And I said, "I can't. I can't tell you how to be a man in this field. It's almost impossible. And when you get stumped, just use me as a referral. That's all I can tell you, kind of deal, because it's kind of one of the same things." I sat down with my 14-year-old son. I was like, all right, we're going to find somebody for you to talk to. We're going to find you a new therapist. And he said, okay. And I said, I really want you to talk to a man. And he's like, well, why? And I said, because you're turning 14, and I don't think a lady's going to be able to understand what puberty is like for a young man. I just don't. And and I think there's just as qualified male therapists out there that will be able to understand and be able to tell you how to deal with things that men go through as a young man, how to go through rejection of a girl when you ask her out, how to go through, puberty, a change in voice, being embarrassed, other major embarrassing things. And I just don't know that a lady will be able to tell you how to get through that. And telling him that, he was like, okay. He just accepted it. There wasn't a pushback. There wasn't an anger or any of that kind of stuff. He was like, oh, yeah, you say it like that. Cool. But on the same boat, I don't know that I would a female. You bring me a young lady who's going through puberty, I couldn't tell you what that's like. I'll work with her the best I can, but I don't know what it's like to go through puberty as a female. I don't know what it's like to go through birth pains or any of that kind of stuff. So let's let the men be men with men.
Mm. Well, I think the early days of psychotherapy with like Sigmund Freud, it was heavily male dominated, and he had this idea that everything is secretly about sex.
Yeah.
There may have been an overlooking of the female perspective at that time because they were kind of excluded from the field. Now that we've swung so heavily in the other direction, where we're a heavily feminized field, what do you think we might be missing on this other side of the pendulum swing?
I mean, we're not missing anything from Freud. I can tell you that. Heroin is still bad. Don't sleep with your clients. All the things that he did. Like, don't do any of those, right? But I think that you're missing the male perspective, especially the masculine male perspective, right? I'm not excluding anybody, but the masculine male perspective is important, and you're blaming everything on them, but you're not including them. We want to be inclusive. Let's include some people, like all of them, you know? And so now we're missing. the female perspective is now the whole agenda, it seems like it's about how you feel, it's about the emotion, and men don't respond to that as well. So I think we're missing that side of it. Is that what you're looking for? Is that the
It for
question?
sure does.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's interesting because I don't think it's an accident why people choose the modalities that they do. I'm big on CBT and solution focus as well. We're both men, therapists, not woke, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think with CBT, well, with solution focus, you have to have some direction. I think in a lot of like critical theory, for instance, it's all about just pointing out things and calling them problematic. You're not worried about solving any of these problems. You're just worried about pointing them out. And with CBT, like, you have to acknowledge objective reality exists. Something can't be a cognitive distortion unless there's truth,
Truth.
you
Yeah.
know?
Mhm.
You have to have like a logical, rational approach to things, which is so at odds with this postmodern, like very progressive worldview that's developed. And I don't think it's an accident that you chose those modalities.
Right. No, I mean, absolutely not. Right. I think there's things like CBT, CPT that do really good for unpacking childhood trauma. But I think that a lot of men have gotten through that stuff and they're on to other things. Now, do they affect your life and how you act and how you do things? Absolutely. But I don't think I need to dig those up on session one. So a lot of men are coming because something's wrong in their life and they want help figuring out how to get from A to B. That's why I use solution focused. Like, okay, what's your goal? Where do you want to go? And of course, in the midst of solution focused, then you get, well, these things happen in my life. Okay, well, let's talk about those because obviously they're affecting where you're at today. And that's where we reprocess and do those sort of things. So it's really changed that side of it. But I think that that's kind of the idea is men don't want to go talk about their feelings. Men are having a problem and want to go get some help. And that help usually comes in the form of a solution. Like, all right, try this. And I tell them up front, hey, I'm going to tell you, try a few things. You come back next week, tell me if it worked. If half of it worked and half of it didn't, then we'll try some new things and come back again. You know, I told somebody the other day, I said, I run solution focused therapy. And they were like, okay, explain that. So I told them, I said, but it's a really poor business model because in my mind, somebody comes and sits down with me. I give them perfect answers to their problem. They go apply those perfect answers to their problem. It resolves and they know how to deal with it for the rest of their life and they never come back, which is a really bad business model because nobody comes back, but that's what solution focused kind of looks at. And they were like, oh yeah, that is a bad business model. Yeah. So
And then I've talked to so many like quality therapists on here who say the point of therapy is to stop coming to therapy, like to get healed and
yeah,
progressing to the point where you don't need it anymore. But so often, I mean, you see so many people who have been to years of therapy, and it's like the therapist is the closest person in their life. And I think a lot of people bash CBT. I mean, this is kind of, I'm all over the place here. A lot of people bash CBT because they say it's shallow. And there's some legitimacy to that criticism, but I don't think the therapist needs to be or necessarily should be the deepest relationship in your life. I think the therapist should help be a conduit to try to move you towards those deep relationships with friends and family and other people in your life. Is that
absolutely. Yeah, 100%. So the deepest relationship you should have is with God. That
yeah.
should be, I mean, that's where you should be able to go every single day to tell every problem you ever have. The second should be your spouse. And my good book written in red, man, it says, think of your spouse as yourself. All right, you are now one. And it tells men to leave their family and cling to his wife, right? It's telling the men to go to the woman and she be the support and to leave the family. So I think that's a commandment of males to do that, right? And so then your spouse, okay? If your therapist is above God and the spouse, there's the problem right there. Like that is indicative of an issue you're dealing with already, you know? And so then from your spouse, maybe your kids, maybe somebody else, maybe your best friend. I know my best friends probably know more than they want to about me, and that's okay, so but that's what I tell people in session. First go to God. All right. And then from there, your spouse you should be going to God with your problems with your spouse. You should be praying with your spouse. They should know these things. And then working on communication, which is funny you said that because I tell my guys when they're like, how do I talk to my wife about these things. I said, well, it's three H's. These are the things I use for my clients: helped, hugged, and heard. Okay. If you're going to her with a problem, you might tell her, hey, I need some help on this thing. Right. So I need you to help me figure out what to do with the kitchen or whatever. Sometimes if they're coming to you, a lot of times they just want to be heard. They just want you to say, hey, I hear you. This is what you feel. Communication is receiving the information and able to relay it back with the same emotion, feeling, understanding of the whole thing. So do that. This is what you feel. This is how you feel about Debbie down at work giving you problems. I understand. But they don't necessarily want a solution. They just want you to hear them and be present with them. And then sometimes it's hugged. And I said that doesn't always mean physical intimacy as it much as it might mean presence. It might be as simple as sit on the couch with me and watch a movie with no distraction, no cell phone, no, no kids, just me and you and be together. And that helps me feel more at peace. Um, and I said, guys, it's okay to ask. It's okay to ask. Like, ask your girl, do you want to be helped? You want help? Because I give you a solution, what I think might work. Do you just want me to listen to you? Do you want me to, you need a hug? You know, because they will respond very well to that. I've never seen somebody be like, "You're not listening." They've always responded well. And I think the same thing applies to therapy. Sometimes these people are coming to be heard. They want a safe area where they could just let it all out. That cathartic experience of people aren't going to tell anybody, that's a great place for them. Or they want help. Okay. We should be hugging our clients. So I don't hug my clients. So no hugs, but you know, I think that goes both directions for those sides of things. So
So I got three questions left for you, and one has to do with kind of the rigor of the field, or like in grad school. Do you think in general we're being trained well to be outside of like the political bias? Do you think we're being trained well to be clinicians?
it depends. So my girlfriend, she lives with me. She's about to take her test to be a therapist. Also, she just graduated from Hardin Simmons, actually. And her program, one, was a religious school, so that made a difference. And her program was more about systems, existential, so a little bit deeper. Where my program was about a lot about research, like how to use the things that we're learning to do research. But a lot of my professors were research based, so that made sense. A lot of her professors are marriage and family therapists using, systems and that sort of thing. So that made sense. So I think a healthy mix of the two, because sometimes we're talking about things and I see where I'm wrong because I'm thinking of it like research. And other times I'm looking at things that she's saying, thinking she might be a little off because she's thinking of it like a system. And we have to come to more of an understanding. So I don't think that there's any program that's perfect. Um, I think that the biggest problem that we've probably faced is internship and practicum is not oversight as good as it should be.
Mm,
A lot of the internship and practicum stuff that I know of from people I know, they are a little too loose on their rules, and I have a wonderful supervisor. My supervisor now, after I'm done with all of that, is great. He's into notes, ethics. We talk about clients. We unload everything. He's probably the best professor I've ever had. So I think if an internship and practicum was as tight as it is now for me in supervision, I would have been better prepared. So
that's interesting. Yeah. I probably had like an opposite experience. I thought the theoretical stuff of grad school was just very weak, not great preparation at all. But actually practicum and internship I had wonderful supervisors and really enjoyed what they did.
yeah.
That's interesting.
And see, I think it prepares you a lot better than it would somebody who was a little bit weaker on that area. Um,
Yeah.
I was decently going through practicum and internship. Not that I was perfect, but there were some others that were going with me into the same supervisor who was pretty weak on some of those areas.
Yeah.
And it was kind of just a check the boxes. Oh, you came and sat in my office for an hour, check the boxes. And I think that when they came out, I've been in sessions with them or heard from clients of theirs that they weren't as prepared. It feels like that it could have been if they'd have been a little bit more serious, a little bit better oversight.
Mm, gotcha. So two questions left for you. One is, how do we fix the therapy profession?
Oh, how do you fix it, man? I think that it comes down to kind of err on the side of caution and stay in your lane. Okay.
Mm.
Um, I know my limits and I kind of put my limits right forefront. Okay. I'm probably not going to do postpartum depression with a female who had a baby. I don't, I can listen to her. I can give some advice on how to deal with depression, but I'm probably not going to be her best bet. If I can get her and say, "Hey, listen, I know somebody else who's a lady who's really good, who has been through these things and come through them, and it looks great for what I can see. Why don't you try to work with them?" You know, I'm not pawning anybody off. I'm not violating any ethical codes on that sense. I'm not going to do that. But I think that that's kind of the key. You know, I think if a ex-military veteran with combat experience comes and sits down in somebody's office that's got her PhD in elementary counseling, I don't think she's going to be the best bet. And I think that she should stay in her lane and send them to somebody who would be. That's my biggest thing. And then stop hating on each other, man. Let everybody think their own way. Like, what, like let them think their own way. So, and of course, Jesus don't hurt nothing.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. The last part. Gosh, it's so interesting because I've had a disagreement. I don't know if you know Jake Wiskerson, but I've had a disagreement with him on here where he was talking about kind of like we should be more generalists to kind of be able to handle anybody. And my take is like, there's a lot of people, female with relationship issues. I mean, at best, I'm going to be functional to be able to help you, but men with addiction and mental health issues like combined, like I am incredibly good at honing in on that population. And I think it's better to have like a population that you really, really know inside and out and specialize in compared to being able to help everybody a little bit.
I think you're right. I had my supervisor just tell me that right now is a great time for me to explore different
Mm,
populations and kind of hone in because he's kind of oversight. So I can come to him with a problem. So I've opened up my practice to even younger people and older people. And I realized I really love transitional therapy with these guys that have, been sick, gone through strokes, or haven't, stopped working because of medical health, mental retirement, whatever. They're kind of my jam. I love those guys. Like, they come in, and I'm really happy to see them that I did not think would be a thing for me. Um, but once that happens, I know that population. I'm generally okay with everybody, no matter what they are, no matter who they are, what demographic, what anything. I'm generally okay. But you're right. I think it's functional. You
mm,
know, if a police officer wants to come sit down with me who's dealing with relationship, marriage, custody issues, that's my jam. And I know that because I've gone through it kind of deal, I mean, so I can tell you what worked for me and we can explore things that work for you, even if it's different. I'm okay with, oh, this didn't work for me, but it works for you. That's great. Let's do that.
mm.
So I disagree with your friend. Uh, yeah,
He's a sharp guy, and I think he makes a good point. I just I land differently on that issue.
well, I think on the ethical codes, what other ethical codes you look at, I've had to read the social worker ethical code. I've had to read, the APA ethical code. I think that it makes a good point of we're not going to turn anybody away for discrimination reasons, and I'm 100% about that. I'm not going to tell somebody I won't work with you because of blank, blank, and blank. That's rude. That's wrong. That's against my nature. That's against my religion. I'm going to help anybody that needs help. But on the other hand, it's one of those situations where if I can help somebody find a better fit that's going to understand better, I think it's my obligation to do that. Now, if they still want to come sit down in my chair because they want to do therapy with me, then okay, come sit down. I'm good with it. Come on. You know, that's my thought process behind it. But I'm very
Mm,
upfront about it to begin with too.
yeah.
So if somebody tells me that these are the issues they're going through, I can say to them, "Hey, listen, I don't have much experience in that area. If you still want to come to me, wonderful. If you want me to help you find somebody that's more experienced in that area, I'll do that. Which way do you want to go?"
I can't help but think that a lot of this is financially motivated too. If I know I might not be so strong in an area and I know another therapist is better there, but I got to pay rent, you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
that's a motivator that we don't talk about I don't think enough. And I think when we talk about, are you going to therapy for 5 years, is part of that because the therapist wouldn't discharge you because you're their annuity.
And that rings back to something that I heard once, and I really, really hated it because I heard a therapist say, "Well, going to therapy is like changing the oil. You do it once a month on your car, you should do it once a month for yourself." And I'm thinking like, no, that's about rent or mortgage. That's what that statement's about. Like, that's what hit me first. And I don't think she meant it like that. I don't think she was trying to be mean or rude. I think she was just giving me an implication that I wasn't coming to therapy enough for what she was hoping.
Hmm.
But it is a motivator. I think it is I don't want to give up clients because that's where I pay rent. But I'm also, a Bible believer. God will supply. He'll take care of me. And if I'm helping somebody go the right direction for the right purpose with the right heart, uh, I promise you, he'll replace that client for you.
Hmm. Like that. So my final question is, when you look at society more broadly, what is one issue that we're not talking about enough that we should be talking about more?
Ooh. um, Men raising children.
Mm.
And there's a pretty good TED talk about it where and don't get me wrong, I was raised by a single mom. Okay. My mom busted her butt and did the best job she could do. My dad just walked out on us and took off. And so I think I'm gonna have some background noise. Let me cancel this background noise real quick. I'm sorry.
You're good.
It's gonna screw up the whole whole thing. Let me
You're on a roll too.
uh I don't even know if you can hear that, but I can hear it. I'm hoping it doesn't mess you up. Okay.
It's a light hum, but my software is pretty good at dealing with that.
Oh, good. Um, so I think that the TED Talk actually talks about single moms versus two parent homes versus single dads, and the statistics show that uh, children raised by just a single dad have a better chance of not going to prison, not having premature babies. I mean, not premature babies, but uh, babies out of wedlock, babies before high school. Um, there's a lot of those things, but I think that there's a lot of stuff that kind of prevents that in a lot of areas. I don't think my area where I live is that way. I think that there's a pretty good system here, but in a lot of areas, we're incentivizing some things that I wish we wouldn't, and that would help out. So, so for society in general, I think it should be an incentive for men to be involved with their kids.
What
And
do
I
you think
think,
the bad incentives are?
do I now?
What do you think the bad incentives are?
Well, I think that incentivizing single motherhood is kind of
Ah,
bad. You know what I mean? Um, Now the thing's talking to me. My automatic vacuum was set to. I didn't turn it off. I'm sorry. Um, I think that there's some systems for like family court systems that are set up that the female is always the initial go to, and it it's not making men be responsible on one hand, and it's not allowing them to and on the other hand. And by making men, I mean, quick story. I had a high school English teacher, and she came in one day and was yelling at all of us about men not being who they should be. And she said, I just watched a young man walk through a door and let three women behind him just stand there. And then she chewed our butts about not opening the door. And then she turned around and chewed the girls' butts about not making us. She was like, you should stand there and look at him like he's the dumbest sucker on the planet until he opens the door for you. So holding both sides accountable. And I was really impressed by that. And that was 30 years ago. And so now I think that there's some systems set up like family court type stuff that allow men to kind of, well, I pay my child support and I see them three times a month and that's it. That's my dad part. But we're not making them or allowing them. Some men don't want to do that. Some men are happy to do that. And I think by making a difference, like, no, you're going to 50-50. You had a kid. This is how we're kind of doing things. I think that would increase the influence of masculine behavior or standards that would help society as a whole.
mm. The single mother thing is a really tough one because in the short term, it feels like you're being very compassionate, but it leads to some outcomes that are a lot less desirable. And to me, that's kind of a microcosm of a lot of the progressive versus conservative mindsets where one step ahead, this is the compassionate move, but three or four steps ahead, it's not what I thought.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you're 100% correct. I think we look at it later down the road and it comes out to be some really bad stuff for people, or whatever it is. So I think that one area is an area where, you know, giving pride to our people that they are good fathers, good husbands. If the marriage didn't work out, the husband does. Um, and focusing on the core of the family will then lead to, I think it'll lead to everything. You know, I think it would lead to a greater nation, you know, the nuclear family. Even if you couldn't work it out with the spouse, I've been down that road. I'm divorced, couldn't work it out. But I think both parents being active, involved, and communicative with each other would make it where the kids would build a better society for us. They would take better responsibility. It wouldn't be about this is how I feel for today, so I'm going to change the entire rule book for today. And then tomorrow it doesn't really work out that way. You know,
Mm.
there was a local high school here that had a litter box in one bathroom because they had a young lady that identified as a cat and was using the litter box.
No.
Yeah. And I don't live in a very big part of Texas, okay? This was a very, very small school. We're talking about less than a few hundred people in the whole school having a litter box in their bathroom. And in the long term, I'm like, wait a minute, how does that what are we doing? Like that's kind of one of those like, well, she feels like a cat. Okay. But she's not.
She's not.
And who and who's cleaning the litter box? Whose responsibility is that? And so I think you're right, where it's just the short term is, well, they feel better, but the long term is, but that's not healthy.
Mm. Wow.
So
I love that answer. I agree with you. RC, thanks for a fascinating conversation. Loved having you on.
thank you so much. I appreciate it.
If you enjoyed this video, be sure to check out my book, The Woke Mind, The Twisted Psychology of the Social Justice Movement, available on Amazon.